Broadcasting live from California, get ready for an hour of pure, unapologetic conservative talk radio. Liberals beware, because this is the Wise Conservative Show.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Conservative Show. As always, I am your host, Connor Wise. Now, last week we didn't have an episode, and that was for good reason. I was in Washington, D.C. for a conference from Young America's Foundation. If you haven't heard of them, I would urge you to look them up. Their conferences have a lot of great speakers. I got to hear speakers including Vice President Mike Pence, Senators Rand Paul and Mike Lee, Newt Gingrich, Nigel Farage from the UK, and countless others. There were so many amazing speakers that I got to hear. And I wish I could show you guys or play audio from every single one of those speeches, but it was a 5-day event. So first off, all day with speakers, that's way too many in just one day. But secondly, there's just so many amazing speakers. But I did pick out what I would say was the highlight. I do wish I could add more into this, but I picked out some of the highlights from that. And I'm going to play some audio, the highlights of these speeches to you guys. I do wish I could have fit in a couple more speakers, including like Dennis Prager, Eric Bolling, all of these different people. But I wasn't able to actually, break down every single one of these speeches. But I did get quite a bit for you guys. And, this past week was really amazing. In all of these speeches, of course, there was varying topics, varying speakers. But the sole kind of large encompassing ideal throughout the entire conference was kind of, what does it really mean to be conservative, and where is the conservative movement heading in the future? And that's something those are two very big questions that everyone really has their own answer to. Every single speaker had their own answer to it. While they were very similar in some of the regards, everyone has their own answer to these questions. Everyone has a different definition for what conservatism is. Everyone has a different definition for where our movement is headed in the future. But all of us do have high aspirations for the future. All of us do have a very large, encompassing definition for conservatism. So they're similar yet different in very unique ways. And so I'm going to play some clips from these different speakers from you guys, the people that I thought were the best out of the entire week. And so let's get into the first one here that I'm going to play for you guys. This is actually Speaker Newt Gingrich. He gave a phenomenal speech. And if you could, I would urge you to watch the full speeches of all of these. You can find them on YouTube. They were also on C-SPAN. But I would urge you to watch the full speeches of all these ones that I'm showing you. But these are just the highlights from some of these. Let's start off with Newt Gingrich here.
The Founding Fathers designed the Constitution to avoid dictatorship. They thought about this very long and very hard. And they were afraid that the mob would turn into a dictatorship, because they'd studied particularly Greek history, where places like Athens had ultimately destroyed themselves by the rise of mobs. And so they consciously created a republic, not a democracy by plebiscite, because they wanted to slow down and calm down popular passion. And they wanted people to have to work their way through. And so they deliberately followed a theory by Montesquieu, a French theoretician, of division of power, or separation of power. So some power is in the Supreme Court, some power is in the House, which gets elected every 2 years, some power is in the Senate, which gets elected every 6 years, some power is in the White House, which gets elected every 4 years, and it's designed to have huge amounts of friction. So the Founding Fathers would say, we're designing a machine so inefficient that no dictator can make it work. Well, they were so brilliant at doing this that we can barely get it to work voluntarily. And so we get frustrated, and we start yelling at each other. And so I want to talk to you about that for a couple of minutes, because I am troubled by the lack of historical depth in our elected officials. It may be partly because we have too many lawyers, but I think it's very important to think about the history of how things operate. In fact, I've always told people that Trump is 1/3 Andrew Jackson for disruption, 1/3 Theodore Roosevelt for energy, and 1/3 P.T. Barnum for salesmanship. And if you think of a blend of those three people, you begin to get some sense of how Trump operates. So part of this thing we've got to remember, and the Republican Party has to learn, is power really does come from the people. That means you have to communicate with the people. The Reagan line was that his job was to shine the light on the American people so they would turn up the heat on Congress. And it was a very effective model. And so I think we have to have an attitude that we are going to explain what we're doing with such clarity that the American people want us to do it. Can we avoid government regulation so we can keep inventing things? Remember, the Wright brothers, in the 5 years before they flew, had 500 failures. Think about that. I mean, imagine if they'd been a government program. After about failure number 3, they'd have been fired. But they did it as a personal hobby. And because it was a personal hobby, they were cheap. The estimate was, now this was in then-year dollars, but the estimate was that it cost them $1 per flight. I believe we're at the edge of a great, extraordinary explosion of energy. I believe we are likely to be the most dynamic country in the world once again. I think that despite some of the confusion, that I think Trump actually is the right person because he is breaking up the norm. And I would much rather have somebody who occasionally does really stupid tweets but is breaking up the norm than have somebody who's elegant and smooth but doesn't have a clue. So I got in a little bit of trouble, by the way, because, Hillary Clinton's going to write this book, which I think is called, like, What Happened? Is it What Happened? Right? And I tweeted the other day, my close friend and attorney Randy Evans is the guy who came up with the idea of having a book called Understanding Trump. And he called me one day in December and said, "You've got to write Understanding Trump." He said, "Nobody understands Trump, and just the title will sell the book." Later on, we decided we'd actually do a book to put inside the title, but still. So he called me the other day and he said, "You have to tweet that you're going to write Understanding What Happened." Now, I'm going to get this wrong, but there's a phrase, it's not manspeak. What is the phrase when men... Mansplaining, yeah. So I suddenly get these tweets suggesting that this is an example of mansplaining, okay? And I didn't understand it, A, because I'm too old for a lot of this stuff. I go to campuses, I say I'm going to commit a macroaggression. And let's just get it over with at phase 1. And I usually say things like, ISIS wants to cut off your head. Now, if you can get over that, we'll talk later about microaggressions. But it occurred to me, there's something profoundly wrong about that model. I am not suggesting that Hillary Clinton does not understand what happened because she's a female. I'm suggesting that Hillary Clinton does not understand what happened because she's a unique human being who has rejected reality her entire life. Trump is more Thatcher than Reagan. The reason the left hates him is they understand he is a mortal threat to everything they value. Reagan was not. Reagan was a huge threat to communism in Moscow, but he was no threat to communism at Stanford. So the left could dislike Reagan, but they didn't have to hate him. But Trump is really a mortal threat to the left. Not because he's a hardline conservative, but because he's anti-politically correct, he's anti-left, he's anti-stupid, and he's deeply. I know there's sort of synonyms, and he is deeply, passionately pro-American. And if you're a true left-winger, you just start twitching when somebody's passionately pro-American because you know that it's only one step away from a fascist dictatorship. And if you actually like the American flag, who knows what other weird values you might have.
So what you heard there was just clips from it. But he did delve into quite a few different issues throughout the entire speech. But one that you did get there, quite a bit of it at the end, was, of course, kind of, attacking that microaggressions and mansplaining, these things that SJWs or social justice warriors have come up with over the past few years. These things that liberals kind of throw out there, leftists throw it out when you're trying to, do anything. If a conservative argues, they call it, if it's a man, it's mansplaining, or you're just microaggression. That was a microaggression. You can't do that kind of thing. I'm offended now. And so he did kind of talk about that. And this is something that we do face all the time, especially on college campuses with these safe spaces. We face these microaggressions. We face all of these different isms that the left throws out there. And it makes it impossible to have a civil discussion. Newt Gingrich pointed out that kind of stuff. And, of course, he kind of focused on Donald Trump throughout the entire thing. A lot of people did. But he focused on Trump more than most people because, of course, he does have that new book that just came out, which is Understanding Trump, which I actually got a copy of, so I'm excited to actually check that out. But Newt Gingrich, he did focus on, kind of what is Trump? Who is he? What is his ideology? Because no one can really put their thumb down on it. And Newt Gingrich himself can't really put his thumb down on it, but he tries his best to. And it does really show where Trump is coming from, where America was coming from with this past election, and how Donald Trump was elected, how he has taken the fight back to the leftist media, back to the leftist campuses, and it's kind of changed the way that we view America. Newt Gingrich was an amazing person to see as a speaker, but if any of you have followed my show for a very long time, you will know that I am obviously a huge fan of Senator Rand Paul. And he was the very first speaker that we heard at this conference, the very first night during dinner. So in the background, you will hear some forks and knives because people were eating at the same time. But this next clip, it's the longest one that I have for you guys. And I might interrupt in the middle at a few points. But this next one was my favorite speech throughout it, not just because, I'm such a huge fan of Rand Paul, but I love the way that he explains things in this. I didn't include every single example because there would be so many. But take a listen, at least to part of this until I interrupt it. But take a listen. This is Senator Rand Paul at Young America's Foundation's conference. So here you go.
If you like Obamacare, you can keep it. Apparently, that is the Republican message. If you like Obamacare, you can keep it. Raise your hand if you want to keep Obamacare. Exactly. Nobody outside of Washington who's a Republican wants to keep it. What happened to these people? I heard them all the time. We're going to repeal it, root and branch. That sounds like all of it and then some. And yet when we got up here, we decided to vote on a partial repeal. And we lost like 8 people who voted for it a year ago. Then we started getting skinnier and skinnier, and we voted on the skinny repeal. What percentage of Obamacare were we going to repeal? Maybe 20%. And we lost people on that. Some people said it was too much, the first repeal. Then they said it was too little, the next repeal. It amazes me how people with a straight face, and one Republican alternative plan said literally, put forward by Republicans, if you like Obamacare, you can keep it. There's still one of those floating around. I just don't understand the disconnect. My father used to call it Potomac fever. People come up here and they get some sort of addiction to power, and it sort of corrupts their brain.
So I want to touch on that a little bit right there. As Rand Paul would call it, or Ron Paul, his father, Potomac fever. And really, this is so true. We see all of these people who campaign on conservative values. We see all these people who campaign on repealing Obamacare, on fixing the economy, all of these different things that any conservative will campaign on. We hear them campaigning, we hear them giving speeches, we hear them in debates about this. And they seem like they're steadfast conservatives. But then they go to Congress or even the presidency, and suddenly they're not implementing conservative action. They're not following what they campaigned on. And of course we saw that with Obamacare as the most recent example, but it's happened time after time. And this is something that does necessarily need to change. It has to change because we can't get anything through Congress at the moment because of this. these people see that, oh, with Obamacare, they're getting more power because they can give this money to people lobbying for insurance companies. And that's what's been happening. There is a sort of power being a congressman or woman in our nation, and it's going to people's heads. Instead of sticking to their ideals, they just continue to want more and more power.
In fact, it was, I think, Lincoln who said, if you want to challenge a man and test a man with adversity, give them power. Are there things that truly are important enough that you should stand your ground on? I think there are, and there have been times in our history when we do. You know, if people ask you who is a hero, and if I were to define what a hero is, to me a hero is someone who is not a man or a woman of their times, but a man or a woman beyond their times. You know, the question I asked Debbie Wasserman Schultz about a year ago was, you know, when does life begin? And, you know, many of them say when you take the baby home. And it's like, really? So if your baby's in the hospital for a couple of months, it's not really alive? You know, in my practice, I would examine babies that were sometimes a pound and a half. But the thing is we say, well, I'm for the right to not have red light cameras. I hate red light cameras, by the way. But the thing is to get to red light cameras, you got to be for something even more important than that precedes that, individual liberty and rights. We got to understand where our liberty comes from, that our liberty precedes government, that our liberty comes from our Creator. You know? So here we are sitting debating Obamacare, and my side, God help us, my side decides that the only way we can replace it is to have a nearly $300 billion insurance stabilization fund. They said, well, insurance is too expensive. So what we'll do is we'll tax everybody, put it into a fund, give it to the insurance companies, and they can charge less. And so I raised my hand, which is always a danger at lunch. And I said, well, you know, I haven't had a new car in a while. New cars are very expensive. If we could have a new car stabilization fund, that would help me. And I've got 2 kids in college. Could we have a college stabilization fund? And my kids, I don't know about any of you, probably not, it's never happened to any of you. My kids drop their phone in rivers, lakes, ponds, you name it. And iPhones are expensive. Could we not have an iPhone stabilization fund? When did it become a Republican idea to take from the general populace a tax, stick it into a fund, give it to a private company, and tell them to lower their prices? It is not Republican. It is not conservative. People will ask me, they say, do you think government is inherently stupid? I say, well, I don't know, but it's a debatable question. Look, they can't even deliver the mail. The post office, they haven't figured out that we have email. It's the first problem. But the post office loses $1 billion a quarter, $4 billion a year. So they came to my committee a couple of years ago and they said, well, to retain good people, to have a good post office, we're going to have to pay the executives more. And so I raised my hand, which is always a problem. And I said, well, how much talent does it take to lose $1 billion a quarter? You think you got to pay people $2 million to lose $1 billion? I'll work for $500,000 to lose $1 billion. If the standard is losing $1 billion a quarter, conservatives are very good with the Second Amendment. That may be their best amendment, probably. And I'm all for the Second Amendment. I am very supportive personally, in public, and every which way you can think. But the thing is you have to think of all the Bill of Rights as a conservative. If you want to defend the Second Amendment, you got to really believe in the First Amendment. Because without speech, without discourse, and without the ability to organize and associate with fellow believers in the Second Amendment or any other amendment, you're not going to keep it. But you also have to have the Fourth Amendment. And I spend a lot of my time trying to protect the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says the government can't come in your house without a warrant. The warrant has to have your name on it, and they have to specify what they want. Why is this important? Because you live in the digital era. You don't even remember the era before the digital era. Everything's digital. And it's not that the government's going to come in your house and ask for your papers, because really you don't have papers anymore. Post office, we don't have mail anymore. But you do have your phone. Your whole life's on your phone. And the government has no right to look at it unless they individualize. They have to put your name on a warrant, and they have to go to a third party. The third party is an independent judge. When we look at our system, though, compared to other countries, I think the real fallacy is, and this is another Bernieism, we were in committee the other day, and he said, we have the worst childhood, we have the worst childhood poverty in the whole world. Are you kidding me? Have you traveled anywhere in the world? It is never good to be poor, and we do have poor people in our country. But if you compare the poor in our country to almost any other country, it doesn't even compare. Go to India, go to Central America, travel in Africa, and you'll find out what poverty is really like. So we do need to be proud of our system. But when we're discussing anything, Obamacare, whatever it is, it really is, do you want freedom or do you want coercion? Do you want big government or do you want to be left alone? And I'll end with this. As conservatives, sometimes you will be branded as, you're just for austerity, you don't want to help anybody, you don't want to give anybody anything, There was a painter by the name of Robert Henry, and he said to young painters, his exhortation was to paint like a man coming over the hill singing. I like the image of that. I like the optimism of that. And what I would say is when you go back to your college and when you go back out into the rest of the United States, think about the optimism and the hope that comes from freedom, from the system that has made America great. And if you want America to be great, you got to understand why we became and how we became great. And remember the image of a man coming over the hill singing.
I really liked all of the different examples. Now, in the real speech, he had a lot more examples, a lot more real-life examples, historical examples that he used. But I really loved the examples that he used to defend conservative ideals. And he does bring up a good point that I've discussed before on this show is, we constantly defend the Second Amendment. We constantly defend the First Amendment. But as conservatives and as Americans, it's our job to defend more than just 2 of the 10 Bill of Rights. It's our job to defend the entire Bill of Rights. It's our job to defend all of the amendments to the Constitution, to defend the Constitution itself. A lot of people kind of get lost in that. They kind of forget about the other amendments. And I do see that kind of having an effect, especially with in terms of the debate between security and liberty, which is a huge debate that really isn't talked about enough. But I'm going to take a quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. This is The Wise Conservative Show. Hi, everybody. Connor Wise here with an exclusive clip from The Wise Conservative Show. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. And every time that these universities take up this new social change that they're trying to promote, every time they take that up, they are taking away from that education instead. Because now they're focusing on these social changes instead of learning like they should be.
Ever wanted to learn the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in less than 10 minutes? Are you looking for the truth about the so-called gender wage gap? Well, my friends, I'll let you in on a little secret. Prager University is a source that I use all the time when preparing for my show, The Jason Veely Program. Dennis Prager and his team have put together a remarkable organization that seeks to explain and spread Americanism through the power of the internet. Their short yet extremely informative videos reach more than 100 million people per year, and they want to reach you as well. Go on YouTube and type in Prager University, or go to prageru.com for all of their latest content. That's Prager, the letter U.com. prageru.com.
Have you ever wanted to stand up to your liberal professor? Have you ever wanted to help expand the conservative movement? Well, it sounds like you would be a perfect fit for Youth Revolt. Youth Revolt is a team of dedicated young conservatives fighting liberal indoctrination within our school system. If you're interested in being a part of this team by being a columnist or even hosting your own radio show, go ahead and click the Join Now tab at the top of youthrevolt.org. You'll be asked to answer a few questions, and a Youth Revolt team member will respond to you quickly. Be a part of something bigger than you. Be a part of Youth Revolt. Speak without fear.
My friends, I'm going to be blunt with you. There are a lot of frauds out there today. People who claim to be conservatives and yet, in one way or another, believe that more government is the solution to our problems. That's not what conservatism is about, and even more than that, That's not what our Constitution is about. I'm Jason Veely, a recent college grad who has the guts to say what needs to be said without pulling any punches. On my radio show, you can expect 100% pure conservatism every single weeknight at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Join me as we discuss history, liberty, and conservative philosophy in a style that is just as entertaining as it is educational. Who says we can't have fun tearing down the liberal establishment? Tune in to the Jason Veely program live every weeknight at 7 o'clock on youthrevolt.org. I'll see you out on the battlefield.
Love Trump's hate! Love Trump's hate! Love Trump's hate!
Love trumping hate involves a lot more assault and arson than I expected. The Wise Conservative Show, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, only on Youth Revolt. Welcome back to the Wise Conservative Show. Once again, I am your host, Connor Wise. Now, we're going over for this entire episode, basically, all of these different speakers that I did here at the National Conservative Student Conference in D.C. this past week. And I gotta say, it was an amazing experience. Once again, I don't mean to have these advertisements for it. But it was just such an amazing conference. I do encourage you, this is for college students, so if you are in college, I encourage you to go to this one next year, and they have other conferences as well. But I got to meet all of these different people, such as Rand Paul. I got to actually talk to Rand Paul a little bit, shake his hand. And all of these different people I got to actually meet. Nigel Farage I got to meet. And I got to shake their hands. I got to get some of their books for free. It was amazing. Now, this next person, I didn't get to meet personally and shake their hand because there was so much security. You might know where I'm going with this if you listen to the very beginning of the episode. But this next speaker, it was such an honor to hear him speak, and it was amazing. This next speaker was Vice President Mike Pence, and being able to hear him speak was really so amazing, and it was able to kind of give us a window into the administration. Now, we'd heard other people speak already. Kellyanne Conway spoke, and other people from within the administration had already spoken at this conference. But being able to hear Mike Pence's view on everything was amazing. So I have a clip, or a couple clips from his speech to play to you guys. And wow, it was really an amazing speech. So take a listen.
I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican, in that order. You know, as I said in an address I gave at the University of Notre Dame just a few months ago, we live in a time when free speech and civility are waning on campuses across America. But YAF is committed to change that, and you're making a great difference. You've been speaking out against speech codes, safe spaces, political correctness. You fight to defend conservative speakers and students who want nothing more than to exercise their First Amendment right to the freedom of speech. And our president has gone right to work putting men and women into a cabinet, into this administration that have been advancing that agenda with consistency and with courage. I mean, I got to tell you, I think President Donald Trump has assembled the strongest conservative cabinet in my lifetime, bar none. Just look at what our president has done to get the American economy moving again already. President Trump, I'm pleased to report, has actually signed more laws cutting through federal red tape than any president in American history. This president has been unleashing American energy after years of frustration by a liberal administration, like when he authorized the construction of the Keystone and Dakota pipelines and begun to roll back the Clean Power Plan. You know, the truth is, under President Donald Trump, the war on coal is over. And this president's been putting America first, like when he announced that the United States of America officially today notified the United Nations that we are withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord. And when it comes to security at home, our president's been busy as well, securing our borders, enforcing our laws, removing dangerous criminal illegal aliens from our streets, gang members, drug dealers, and violent criminal gangs like MS-13. And I'm pleased to report, under President Donald Trump's leadership and the efforts of our Homeland Security, illegal immigrant crossings on our southern border are down more than 60% since the first day of 2017. Truth is, we got a lot more work to do. My fellow conservatives, let me assure you, job one for this administration going forward is we're going to fight every day to keep the promise we made, and we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare. And while we're working with this Congress to act on health care, I'll make you another promise. President Donald Trump and I are going to roll our sleeves up, sit down with lawmakers, and we're going to pass the largest tax cut since the days of Ronald Reagan. And so I say to this rising generation, with your support, with the leadership that we have in President Donald Trump and in our majorities in the House and Senate and all across this land, and with all of your shining faces, I'm confident, together, we will make America safe again. Together, we will make America prosperous again. And together, to borrow a phrase, we will make America great again.
His speech was obviously really amazing. I mean, it kind of was more of a campaign speech, the way that he delivered it. But it still was really awesome to hear a vice president speaking to us. Now, since we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to quickly move on to the next clip that I have for you guys. Now, this one is Senator Mike Lee. Now, you may have heard of him because he's in the headlines a lot these days, standing right alongside Senator Rand Paul and sticking to those conservative ideals. He had another amazing speech, so I might interrupt this one as well, but take a listen.
All of us, whether public officials or not, U.S. senators or not, all of us have certain things that we are entitled to, certain things that are our birthright as citizens, to which we are entitled, but that are not self-executing. Just as my election certificate wasn't there mounted on my desk that day with my picture on it, which would have identified me, it would have been kind of cool, actually. It couldn't assert itself. I had to assert it, even though it was difficult. And sometimes the task becomes exceedingly important, especially when it is difficult, because it is difficult. We have to assert those things, and those things will not assert themselves. Now, some of your constitutional rights are sufficiently well-worn, sufficiently obvious, sufficiently widely respected that you can reasonably anticipate they will be honored. The Constitution was written by men like James Madison, who understood that if men were angels, they would have no need of government. And if men could be governed by angels, they would have no need of all these rules to restrict the actions of government. But alas, we are not angels, and we don't have access to angels to govern over us. And so as a result, we have to come up with a set of rules by which human beings will be governed. And just as importantly, we have to have a set of rules to govern those who are governed. And so we have these rules in place in the Constitution that split up power along two axes to make sure that no one person and no one group of people becomes too powerful. The vertical axis, the structural protection that operates along the vertical axis is the one we call federalism. This one reflects a very basic concept. The powers of the federal government are, as James Madison described them, few and defined. And those reserved to the states are numerous and indefinite. We have flipped that principle on its head over the last 80 years. Another principle within the Constitution, this horizontal protection, we call separation of powers, accepts the fact that we've got three branches of government. We've got one branch, Congress, the legislative branch, where I work, whose job it is to make the laws. We've got another branch, the executive branch, headed by the president, in charge of enforcing the laws. And a third branch, the judicial branch, headed by the Supreme Court, whose job it is to interpret laws where their meaning is disputed among two or more individuals involved in a legal dispute. Things work really well to the extent that we follow separation of powers and we allow each branch to do its job. It is no coincidence, I believe, that the very first clause of the very first section of the very first article of the Constitution says all legislative powers here granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. This was no accident, you see, because the founders understood that the lawmaking power is potentially the most dangerous of all the powers in government. This is the most dangerous branch because we can set policy, and that policy can be backed up with the overwhelming force of the federal government. And so it was entrusted only for limited times to individuals who would be elected for that very purpose. We've drifted from that one as well. You see, as Congress has become more powerful, it ironically, but somewhat understandably, if you think about it, has found itself too busy to actually make laws. Instead, we delegate the lawmaking power. This is wrong. Now, let me explain how it works. We come up with a principle, a very basic principle, say clean air, and we pass what passes for a law that says something like, we shall have clean air. Well, what idiot's going to vote against that? I mean, you might as well vote against a resolution honoring grandmas or acknowledging how cool an American baseball and apple pie are. So we'll pass that law, and then the fine print says something like this. So we've already established that we shall have clean air, and we hereby delegate to the EPA the task of defining what clean air is, of defining what pollution is, of setting acceptable limits on pollution, and then assessing and collecting fines and enforcing all those same laws that EPA will make. Well, this all sounds fine. We hand these over to experts in the field, and they are. The men and women who run the EPA and all of our other alphabet soup executive branch bureaucracies, look, they're hardworking, they're well-intended, they are well-educated, they're highly specialized people. There is one significant problem. They don't have constitutional authority to enact laws. And they don't work for you. You see, you can't fire them. We have lost sight of the fact that the most important function of the Constitution, in fact, the only reason why you have a Constitution in the first place, is to limit the power of government, to make sure that there is a clear delineation between what government has the power to do and what your rights are. In the process, we've also lost sight of what a right really is. Over and over and over again in Washington, sometimes from colleagues, sometimes from members of the news media, sometimes even from constituents, I'll hear someone asserting that federally sponsored health care is somehow a right. Let me make this very clear. A right is not something the government must provide to you. A right is something the government can't do to you. Please remember that. We as a people, as Americans, believe in the Constitution very deeply. We just happen to be governed by people, at least at the federal level, who are non-believers. We can make them believers again if we re-inject the Constitution back into our national political discourse. I'm also inspired by something Winston Churchill said, which is the American people can always be counted on to do the right thing after they have exhausted every other alternative. Now, Churchill might not have meant that as a compliment. I take it as such. And let me tell you why. It's what distinguishes us from basically every other nation on earth. We have chosen liberty over and over and over again. It's said that a great warrior succeeds not so much because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him. We as a nation owe a great debt of gratitude to our founders. And I invite you to join me in this cause, each and every one of you, in restoring their stories to our national political discussion. As we do, we will prosper.
So Mike Lee's speech, again, was at another dinner. It was amazing. It had a lot of historical context to it, a lot of talk about founding fathers, because he did study that a lot. I thought it was a great speech, and I do have to take another quick commercial break. I'm going to cut out another one of the clips I was going to play for you guys so that I can talk about what the true meaning of conservatism really is in this next segment, and what we are going to do in the future, where we should be headed, and where I think the future of our movement is headed, and how to achieve that. So don't go anywhere. I have a great segment for you guys next after this commercial break. Don't go anywhere. This is The Wise Conservative Show. Hi, everybody. Connor Wise here with an exclusive clip from The Wise Conservative Show. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. How haven't all of these protesters realized that they are the exact reason why Donald Trump was elected in the first place? How haven't they realized that them being crybabies about every single thing in life is exactly why the American people rose up and voted for Donald Trump? They are the whole reason that they have all this misery currently.
If you got a business, that you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
Get out of here, you idiot. Sorry about that, folks. Jason Veely here, host of the Jason Veely program. I'm a 22-year-old conservative who is fired up and ticked off at the direction the progressive left have taken this country. Join me every weeknight at 7 o'clock as we promote liberty, advance conservative principle, and work to restore the Constitution of the United States. I can get loud and I can get passionate. How can we afford not to when so much is on the line? Tune in to the Jason Veely program, live every weeknight at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time on youthrevolt.org. I'll see you out on the battlefield.
Hi, everybody. Connor Wise here with an exclusive clip from The Wise Conservative Show. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. And every time that these universities take up this new social change that they're trying to promote, every time they take that up, they are taking away from that education instead. Because now they're focusing on these social changes instead of learning like they should be.
Calling all young conservatives. Have you ever wanted to write for an online publication? What about host your own conservative radio program? Now you can, thanks to youthrevolt.org. Youth Revolt is a conservative media network for young people, the goal of which is to educate our fellow Americans and also to expose the left-wing indoctrination that goes on in classrooms across the country. Become part of a team that is dedicated to taking the country back, one radio program or opinion column at a time. If you're interested, go to youthrevolt.org and click on Join Us on the top of the page. Fill out our brief questionnaire, and one of our representatives will be in touch with you in no time at all. The time to reclaim our future is now. Be a part of something that's bigger than yourself, and join the movement today. Youth Revolt. Speak without fear. Ever wanted to learn the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in less than 10 minutes? Are you looking for the truth about the so-called gender wage gap? Well, my friends, I'll let you in on a little secret. Prager University is a source that I use all the time when preparing for my show, the Jason Veely program. Dennis Prager and his team have put together a remarkable organization that seeks to explain and spread Americanism through the power of the internet. Their short yet extremely informative videos reach more than 100 million people per year, and they want to reach you as well. Go on YouTube and type in Prager University, or go to prageru.com for all of their latest content. That's Prager, the letter U.com. prageru.com.
Love Trump's hate! Love Trump's hate! Love Trump's hate!
Love trumping hate involves a lot more assault and arson than I expected. The Wise Conservative Show, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, only on Youth Revolt. welcome back to the Wise Conservative Show. Once again, I'm your host, Connor Wise. Now, I wish I had time to play this another clip for you guys from Nigel Farage, but with only an hour-long show, you seem to run out of time very quickly, especially when you're trying to talk about something so important as what I am talking about here. As promised, I'm going to discuss really the value of conservatism, the meaning of conservatism, where we're actually headed. After this past week, with all these different speakers, hearing all of their definitions of conservatism, hearing where they think our movement is going, where it's been in the past, it really did get me thinking about where we are headed, what it is, what are we actually supporting when we're within this conservative movement. And as you know, I have talked about this before. If you follow Youth Revolt very much, I have written an article about what it means to be a conservative. So it's a topic that I do think about. It's a topic that I think is very prominent in our nation and shouldn't be as kind of hidden as it is. We should really be talking about this a lot more. We should really be sharing this with other conservatives and even with independents and leftists so that they can see what it means. And maybe they actually agree with that. But to me, what it means to be a conservative is very simple. It means that you want to protect freedoms and liberties. You want to protect the Constitution and limit the government. It's a very simple definition. It's a very simple cause to follow. And this is what a lot of people do kind of value conservatism as. This is what these people that I even played for you, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Mike Pence, all these different people that I did play for you, they kind of value the same thing. And if you listen to my analysis on my other shows, I kind of always center around this. Smaller government. I mean, this is something that every single conservative agrees with. Less regulations. This is something that we've seen time after time in this new administration. And of course, we want maximum freedom and liberty. That's why we support the Bill of Rights. That's why we don't want overbearing government. That's why we want it more localized when possible. Because the less government, the better. The conservative movement is something that has obviously been around for a very long time. Especially, it's been a very large movement for a very long time. And it's kind of changed throughout history. We've seen it change quite a bit, actually. And it's actually in the middle of a turning point, I think. Not ideologically. It's not changing with the fact that we don't want small government anymore, but it's changing in the fact that now we're kind of using different methods to get to our end game. Now, as we see with like Donald Trump, President Trump in office, he's now using different routes to get to his agenda. He's tweeting a lot more. He's kind of avoiding the leftist media. Because for many years, we've been stuck behind the leftist media. We've been bogged down by it. And we haven't been able to get our word out there because of it. We haven't been able to get our agenda forward and pushed because of that. And that's created people within the Republican Party, which is a mainly conservative party. We have people within the GOP now, which are kind of very moderate instead of conservative because of the leftist media bogging us down for so many years because we couldn't get around them. So we would have to elect these people that were compromising on different issues. That's where you get the Susan Collins from. That's where you get the Murkowskis from, the John McCain's from, the John Kasichs. That's where these people come from because we have been basically censored for many years. But we're seeing the conservative movement and the GOP as a whole finding new routes to get out to the American people and get their word out there. Because we've had to. If you look at public broadcasting, like talk shows, they're majority conservative. And that's no coincidence. If you look at Twitter, there's a lot of conservatives trying to get their message out there. There's a lot of people on Instagram and Facebook trying to get the conservative message out there. And while social media, the owners of it, are generally liberal, we see these conservatives using their platforms as a way to get our message out there. And it's what we've been kind of forced to do within recent times. Because we have been silenced by the leftist media. We have been silenced by college campuses. We have been silenced by these liberal elites. And that's not going to stop, folks. That's not going to stop anytime soon. So in order to get that definition of conservatism, whatever it is to you, because it does vary, what you think conservatism is all about varies from person to person. Whatever you think it is, if you have to find your way to get that message out there, you have to find some way to actually talk about it besides through the media, through the leftist media, because you can't get it out through the leftist media. And so that's what created President Trump. That's how he was able to get around everything, because he did use Twitter quite a bit, because he did find a new route around it. And so through this, we have a new kind of section of the conservative movement. These people that are using technology to our advantage. These people that are finding new routes. These people that are able to stick to conservative values. Now, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is the most conservative person ever, but these people within this movement generally are sticking to our ideals much more because we have other routes to do it. We don't have to compromise as much. And so I think we're seeing a resurgence of true conservatism within the GOP and within other parties in the U.S. And not just in the U.S., across the entire world now. Of course, in Britain, I got to hear Nigel Farage speak, so that was amazing. With the Brexit movement, that was definitely a sign of the same thing happening in Europe. So there's all of this conservative movement that's happening across the entire world now. And it's because there's this new wave of conservatism, this new wave of conservatism that sticks to true conservative values. They're not sticking to this compromise like we had for quite a while. And it's going to actually give a much more conservative viewpoint within our entire government and within policymaking across the nation. And it's going to lead to so much better things. And so I do have a very bright and hopeful future for the conservative movement. I do believe that we are at a turning point right now. We are at a crossroads, if you will. But it's turning for the better. It's changing for the better. We'll be able to get our message out there much more, and we'll be able to actually influence more and more people. Maybe you'll be able to reach that person on your college campus that you weren't able to get to before. Maybe you're able to get to that independent in the Midwest that really didn't care before. And that's how a true resurgence of conservatism is born. By going around the leftist media, by using different ways to actually communicate. And that's how it is made. That's how we were able to get through the blue wall in the previous election. And so we're going to see this. And I have great hopes for the conservative movement, great hopes for the GOP in the future. And I do believe that this is a new resurgence. All right, that's all for today's episode of The Wise Conservative Show. I'm your host, Connor Wise. You can find me on youthrevolt.org. Go ahead and search Youth Revolt up on Facebook. You can find me on Spreaker.com/TheWiseConservative. And of course, we have our show on as a podcast on iTunes if you want to actually listen to it. You can find me on Instagram at @the_wise_conservative. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. And as always, God bless.